All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this year's 2018 Annual Headline Awards, sponsored by the Journalism Department. My name is Connor Keaton, and I'm a student of Mark Radaziner's Advanced Reporting class, and I'm also a writer and reporter for the Campus Ledger, our school's student-run online newspaper. I will be guiding today's discussion, followed by a brief question and answer session at the end. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, someone who spent a lot of work in Kansas as an editor, author, and journalist, C.J. Janovy. Janovy is a Nebraska native who's earned her degree in English from Carolina Berkeley University and master's in creative writing from Boston University. She spent a decade as an editor of The Pitch and now serves as an editor and arts reporter for KCUR, one of NPR's flagship stations. Janovy is also the author of No Place Like Home, Lessons in Activism from LGBT Kansas. It tells the story of how a few disorganized and politically naive Kansans who, after realizing that they were unfairly attacked, rolled up their sleeves, expecting a fight, but came out finding friends in one of the country's most hostile states. Let's all give a warm welcome round of applause to our speaker today, C.J. Janovy.
Thank you, Connor. Thank you. Am I on? Is my mic on? So far, so good then, huh? Thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you, Connor. Thank you to all the folks at Johnson County Community College. I love this college. I love this museum in particular. It's a super honor to be speaking in this room. And I look forward to wandering around a little bit after all the day's festivities are over, because I love how, whoops, all my show and tell displays here, I just hit them. I love how this museum's collection is spread all the way around the campus. And so I hope you guys enjoy that, because it's really a cool thing that the NERMAN does here. Okay, thank you again, Journalism Department at Johnson County Community College. Main rule for writers is always to know their audience. So first of all, can I have all the journalism students just stand up, please? All right, hello to the journalism students. Thank you for being here. Yes. All right, okay, you can sit down. Okay, faculty and staff from the college, can you guys stand up? Faculty and staff, excellent, thank you very much. Very good. Thank you. And just folks from the community who've come to be on campus today. Anyone? Very good. Thank you. Thanks. Great. Okay. So when I was talking with when I heard from Mark Radaziner and Gretchen Thum that I was going to get this honor and that I was going to talk to you guys a little bit about journalism, we sort of came up with this title, A Writer's Journey, which is pretty wide open. I can interpret that to be a lot of different things. So sort of here's what I came up with. So that's what we'll be hearing a little bit about. And I wish, this business about the late 20th century industrial revolution, I don't know, is that the sense that you guys get, what the last couple decades has felt like? Does everyone have a sense of that? When I think about, the Industrial Revolution, and we think about the early 20th century and how everything changed from basically, and I'm going to oversimplify this, and I'm not a qualified historian, but going from an agriculture economy to an industrial economy and how that basically disrupted everything. And it had a lot of benefits and good things happened to a lot of people, but a lot of people back then probably felt a fair amount of economic anxiety. And I think what we're seeing in the last couple of years in my industry is a great example of this with the, that change to digital technology and how much that has changed everything about our lives. And some of you have always lived in that world, but some of us who are a little older have really felt it. And so specifically in print journalism, I could give you guys a lot of statistics for what happened in the print journalism industry. I just sort of looked around and found some good slides. So this is the Pew Research Center. They do every couple of years a state of the journalism industry report. And this one, if we're looking, so 1940 up until 2010, you can see that sort of long peak at over 60 million circulation for daily print audiences. And by 2010, that's down under 40 million, so about 20 million readers lost in that industry. More dramatic graph, though, here is the economics of this. So revenues for U.S. newspapers peaking up in the late 90s, throughout the 2000s, and then falling off the cliff. And that's revenues coming into newspapers, and we can see what that's done to, we have almost a 40% decline in the number of reporters and editors at U.S. newspapers. It's not to say that there are not still jobs out there, and all of you young journalism students, we hope that you will figure out how to make new things that reverse these numbers. Because those of us who've been in the midst of this have tried many things, and so far have not quite figured it out. There's some cool stuff that we do know. So just sort of get a sense of like, who sort of has a sense of what this feels like already? A couple of older folks. Okay, yes, so those of us who've been around. So part of this revenue thing I want to talk about just a little bit. So in the glory days of newspapers, they were filled with the kind of ads that you see now on your social media feeds, okay? And those ads were beautiful, and they were in newsprint. And there's also huge pages and pages and pages in the back of newspapers that had classified ads. So who uses a dating app? Nobody wants to raise their hand. Maybe you guys aren't. So if you've looked for love online, or if in the future you will be looking for love online, that's part of the reason why this revenue has declined, because in the backs of papers like The Pitch, there used to be pages and pages of personals ads, and everybody read the paper from the back to the front. I remember this because every week when the paper would come out, I would go to restaurants and I would watch people pick it up from the rack, sit down at their table, flip it over, and read it from the back. In daily newspapers, a lot of this was car advertising, a lot of stuff that you still see, but only so much more of it. And people paid for it, and now it's all online free. So that's a little bit about what happened to us for those of you who didn't live it in real time. So, a writer's journey. I'm gonna because I decided to take Mark and Gretchen literally, I'm going to sort of show you guys what that's looked like for me career-wise, how I've managed to stay employed in this industry. You'll see all of that stuff in the middle there. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I went back and forth on coasts a little bit, just sort of trying to find my place, okay? So the Lincoln, Nebraska days, I'm very young. I'm the editor of my high school paper, The Oracle. Here's one of my early bylines. We'll just go really fast past that. I got some attention for this. This was a story about me in the paper in Lincoln back in the late 70s, and I won a couple awards in high school for my journalism, and so I thought this is really what I wanted to do. And so University of Nebraska had a well-regarded journalism program, so I went to Nebraska for a couple of years and took the sort of intro to journalism classes, and I kind of became disillusioned. I felt constrained by the rules of journalism, okay? So the idea that your stories, I don't mind short sentences are good, but the idea that you put only the most important stuff at the beginning, and everything after that was least important so that editors could whack off the back of your story if they didn't have enough room. We call that the inverted pyramid. And that really bugged me because I think, the stuff at the end should probably be as important as the stuff at the beginning. And so that was troubling to me. It was troubling to me that when I took the idea of objectivity in journalism, I started to question that a little bit, because I sort of realized in my class assignments, and the more we talked about it, if you really report, and you report, and you report, and you get a strong sense of all the facts in a particular story, sometimes it's pretty straightforward, a couple sides to the story, but a lot of times obvious truths emerge that if you're really doing justice to the story, you're taking a particular point of view of the side of the facts or the side of an injustice, explaining that. And so I began to think, if something's really wrong, it's not really such a great practice to say, there might be something wrong, here's the evidence for why it's wrong, but this other interested party says, maybe things aren't so wrong. And so I think a lot of times that's a very overly simplistic explanation of what we might think of objectivity, telling both sides. But I thought, there's a lot of sides. And I remember also taking a photography class and talking about how if you have a story, that the selection of a photo to run with a story is inherently a subjective process. Now, we've got some photographers in the audience, and it might be fun to talk about this later, but the example being, if you have a story about something that the president's done, and you've got this array of photos, and you could choose one where he's looking very presidential and noble, or you could choose one where he's looking kind of like a doofus, and that's going to give a message to readers. And I just thought, this blew my mind a little bit, and I began to feel disillusioned about what I thought journalism was supposed to be. So I'm going to change to an English major. I really want to write novels. I want to write fiction. I'm going to be a great American novelist. So I left Lincoln and I went out to California to earn my bachelor's degree in English at the University of California. The only thing that really hasn't changed about this time, you probably can't see it in the light, but I have the same pen that I had back then. So got the English degree and still hadn't really written anything. And I thought, well, I worked for a little while, worked as a barista, worked as an office assistant at a law firm in San Francisco, and I still sort of didn't feel like I had figured stuff out. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go to graduate school. So I went to graduate school at the University of Boston. I got a master's degree. I really only remember the name of two people in this picture. We all wanted to be fiction writers. I don't think, well, because I can't remember anybody's name, but I don't think anyone's a well-known fiction writer from this class. But this was a master's degree in creative writing. And the way this worked was we had workshops. And so every week we would meet, people would give us, each person had to, that was their week, so we would hand out our stories to the rest of our class. They would have a week to read them and critique them, and then we'd meet in class, and we had to keep our mouths shut and just listen for an hour while everybody talked about our stories. This was super painful because people hated my stories, with good reason, because I'm a horrible fiction writer. So this was very, very painful to me, but something else happened during that time, which was that everybody hated my stories, but they loved what I wrote on their stories. And after that happened for a few rounds, I began to think, maybe I'm a better editor than writer. And the more people said, oh, I loved what you wrote on my paper, that was so helpful. And the more, that kept happening. And so I thought, and it had never occurred to me to be an editor. But that's when I sort of first started thinking about it. I got out of there, they gave me the degree. I don't think they really wanted to. But I got the degree, and again, I was working sort of odd, what feels like odd jobs in retrospect. I'm a really fast typist, and so I would get jobs. Back then, we had this thing called word processing, where you can go and be the typist, only it was on a computer, so it was word processing. And so I was going to temp agencies and getting assignments to go work in offices, typing, and I was thinking, what's next? I'm gonna write this novel. Even though I'm a sucky fiction writer, I still am determined to write fiction despite all of the experience at grad school. And then so think about this. Anyone watch the new Roseanne show? Okay, a few people. So back during the first run of Roseanne, I was a huge fan. I watched it every Tuesday night. And who remembers this? Again, the folks of a certain age. So I'm a fan of Roseanne's. I watch it every week. My friends watch it every week. She does this. I'm gonna play this for you. It's gonna be painful, but it's just a couple minutes, so. A few of you laughed. I'm a fan of Roseanne. I keep saying that because I need to remind myself. So the response to this was swift, brutal. It came from everywhere. Everybody condemned Roseanne, president on down. And I thought that was really funny, actually. I thought it was a pretty profound statement on some things about our national anthem that are a little weird. First of all, it's really hard to sing. It's really, really hard national anthem to sing. I'm imagining some people don't really know the words. And so I believed that her point was, this is a weird thing about our culture. And I'm a comedian. The San Diego Padres have invited me to do this, and I'm gonna do my job. And I'm gonna point out the absurdity of this particular piece of American life. And the TVs didn't show it, but she grabbed her crotch there at the end, like baseball players do. We have to watch guys do that as part of our national pastime. And then she spit, which we also have to watch. So I was disturbed at the pile-on that I saw for the person who I was a fan of, and I had noticed this thing on my little commute to my word processing jobs every day on the train outside of Boston, that the New York Times had on its editorial page this little note that said, we take unsolicited manuscripts, and so send us your stuff. What am I doing here? Which I did. This becomes my first clip. I faxed it in. I wrote this defense of Roseanne Barr's rendition of the national anthem. I faxed it to the New York Times. They called me. They said, we're going to publish this. They paid me $150 for it. And this changed my life. First of all, I realized maybe I could get paid $150 now and then for writing for newspapers, my old newspaper thing. And This was huge validation, of course. I may be a really sucky fiction writer, but the New York Times wants my thoughts on real life. And the other, even bigger life-changing thing that happened with this was when they called me to say we're going to do this, they said, we'd like to publish this piece, but it's about twice as long as we have room for. So, Ms. Janovy, we're going to cut it in half, and I'm going to go on the phone. This is a copy editor from the New York Times op-ed desk calling me and saying, I'm just going to go line by line with you as we cut this down to size to make sure all these changes are okay with you. And I was like, okay. And so this took about 20 minutes, and they published my piece. And at the end of that 20 minutes, though, I had like this master class in line editing from some person at the New York Times. I don't know this woman's name, but it was amazing to me to watch what she did to my sentences and how she made it so much better and how it fit in the paper. And so I left Boston with this this sense from the workshops of storytelling, big storytelling, and how to craft a narrative and how to make a story. And then this information from the copy desk on how to deal with sentences. So I had a big picture, I had sentence level stuff, and I thought, I realized in retrospect that I had learned just the basics of how to be an editor, something I never set out to do. Remember that little map? I ended up back in the middle, so hated Boston, wanted to go back to California, made it this far, partly because I wanted to spend some time, I needed to regroup in life a little bit, and I kind of wanted someplace that felt like home. But Lincoln seemed too small to really have a lot of word processing jobs. So I thought Kansas City's a big enough town, and so I came to Kansas City in 1990 with my one clip from the New York Times, and I began what became this great career in alt-weekly print newspapers. And so at that time, there was The Pitch, there was this other sort of competing scrappy paper called The New Times. Danny and David, who are in the audience, Danny Alexander, David Cantwell, are veterans of both of these papers with me. Does everybody know you? Would you like to raise your hand? Okay, so these guys wrote for these papers, and anyone remember the old New Times? Awesome, thank you. Yeah, 3 people, good. So this was glory days of alt-weeklies. And the Pitch and the New Times sort of competed. They weren't weekly, and then the Pitch went weekly, and the New Times went out of business. That was all through the 90s. Late 90s, I actually got a job as managing editor of Westward out in Denver, which is a legendary paper, working with a legendary editor. So I went out there for a couple of years, and then the company that owned Westward bought the Pitch, and I came back to Kansas City. Also, during that time, sorry, I've messed up my program here. Stand by, please. During that time, when before I went to Denver, in the 90s, working for the old Pitch and the old New Times, it was the glory days, but we hadn't quite figured out how to make a good living with that in Kansas City, and so I got paid about minimum wage to work for the old Pitch. Plus, I got paid in movie passes and restaurant trade, which was great. And we had door passes to the old Grand Emporium, that kind of thing, so I could get into bars. I was always on guest lists. But I did sort of need to supplement, and the folks in the English department here at Johnson County Community College were kind enough to allow me to be an adjunct instructor here, and so I spent several years also teaching at the same time as we were all working on those papers. I don't have pictures of me teaching here, but that's how my hair would have looked at the time. So one of the huge lessons of being able to teach here at the college in composition classes. I taught a lot of basic composition classes, and what really helped me, that helped me be an even better editor because I had to know my grammar rules better than everybody else in my classes, and so I really had to study up on that. And I loved teaching here. I love the students here. I love the mission of the community college, and I think those were really great years. I'm very, very grateful for that experience. I was grateful, though, also when I went to Denver to not have to work more than one job. And so those times in Denver in the early days at the pitch under ownership of what was then Village Voice Media, those were, as I say, the glories days. And so here's another one of those slides from the Pew showing average per paper circulation for alt weeklies. And this graph doesn't even go back to the time that I was there. It starts in 2012, but you can see that number going down also. And so while I got in just at the end of those fun times, I sort of oversaw the pitch at a time of really troubling decline. Here is one of those copies of the pitch that was in the previous slide, and I don't know if you can tell from far away, but it's kind of heavy. It's 88 pages. I'll just pass that around if you guys want to touch this relic. I didn't see a copy of the new pitch now. It's now monthly. It's much thinner. They're still doing great journalism. And so I would encourage all of you to pick up that paper and read it, but you see what this looks like. And this was not fun financially to be in this position. And I'd been there 10 years by now. I'd had to lay people off at Christmas. It was troubling. And so I thought, I need to begin to see what else is out there, what's on the horizon for me. And I made a career change that was really surprising to a lot of people. And I left that side of journalism. And I went to become a director of communications at the University of Kansas Medical Center, which is basically, I thought, public relations. So, the public relations folks. Which some of us, on the other side are like, oh, that's the other side. And I got recruited to this job. And I should clarify, the University of Kansas Medical Center is a huge campus down at 39th and Rainbow, and it's a very complicated place. And when most people hear University of Kansas Medical Center, they think it's a hospital. Is that what you guys are thinking? Yeah. It's partly a hospital, but half of it is a school. It's the medical, it's the healthcare arm of the University of Kansas. And so I worked for the school. I did not work at the hospital. I was overseeing all communications for medical school, nursing school, and all those allied health schools there. So anesthetists, nurse anesthetists, there's a long list of allied health. So this is academic communications. This is not advertising. This is a little bit of PR, but this was way more complex than I imagined it would be. I ended up doing sort of internal and external communications for a campus of 3,000 people, really, and external communications. And so what that looked like from the outside, just a little bit, I helped fix the website from University of Kansas Medical Center. It had, at the time, about 100,000 pages on it. Many of them literally had not been updated since the internet had been invented. And this was a real problem, so I worked with lots of offices there to sort of improve what the website looked like. I oversaw staff that we put out a magazine, and I did PR. I did work with reporters in the media, and because I had been a reporter and an editor, I really knew how to pitch stories to reporters, and this sort of peak of all that activity happened in 2010, I think, when I got a story placed on the front page of the New York Times. So, University of Kansas opened one of the smallest medical school campuses in the country out in Salina, and this was a big deal because rural America has a doctor shortage. There aren't enough doctors out there, and KU's theory was if we train doctors in rural America, maybe they will stay. And Salina isn't necessarily rural America, but it's kind of close. And so they opened the school, and New York Times was interested in this. So I've got these two New York Times moments of greatness that I can discuss, that I'm proud of. But this was not my job. This was not my side of the industry. I want to write and report, and I stayed at KU for about 4 years. I did very well there. I was successful. We had a great team. We did fun things. I learned so much, but I really, really wanted to go back to the reporting side, and I was able to do that at KCUR. Thankfully, I started as an arts reporter almost 4 years ago, and this was another huge leap for me. I really had to convince the people at KCUR that I was serious, because I'd been this high up in management executive newsroom leader for my whole career, and they were like, this is an arts reporter opening. Are you sure you want this job? And I said, yes, please. And I told them, about how the great arts coverage in the pitch for all those years. And because I had been in PR, I really knew how to sell them on this idea that I really wanted this arts reporting job, and I really did, because at that point, I'd had these big careers, and I was uncomfortable in what I was doing at KU, and I was really asking myself, what do I really want? What would really be fulfilling for me? And I kept hearing music, arts. That was the message the universe was sending. So when this job came open, I knew I had to try for it, and it involved a fairly substantial pay cut, but it also involved learning an entirely new skill, okay? I didn't know anything about radio. I had zero radio experience. And the folks at KCUR knew this, but they also knew that I had other skills that would help, and so they said, okay, we'll hire you. And so I began learning a whole new way of storytelling. Who does radio production here? Okay, very good. What do you guys know about writing for radio versus writing for print? Anything? Did you say anything about that? Maybe. Any other thoughts on that? I know you want to say something. It's totally more brief. It's totally more brief. Right, thank you. Writing for radio is completely different than writing for print. And so I had to learn a whole new way of writing. I had to learn a whole new way of storytelling. Storytelling with sound is completely different than storytelling with words or pictures. And so I spent the first year really in the KCUR newsroom. The interns knew more than I did. And this was very humbling for me, but it was also super interesting. And once I began to figure it out, it was so much fun. If anybody here has not tried storytelling through sound, you totally should. And the other cool thing about it is sometimes I got my stories on NPR. And so this was, maybe I have maybe 6 or 10 stories that were national. And so I want to play this one for you guys because it's a really good example of what I mean with storytelling through sound. And it's about 5 minutes, which is going to feel kind of long, all of us just sitting here in the room. But if you think about how most people hear radio, they're driving, they're doing other things, and that's another reason why writing is really different and sound is really different, because you have to keep those the attention of these people who are distracted. So if I see all of you starting to fall asleep, then we'll stop it. But so that was cool. That's some of the really fun things that I get to do at KCUR. But there's this thing about this book that Connor mentioned earlier, and that was like this unfinished business that I had from my days at KU. If you'll remember, I was not really 100% comfortable in the work that I was doing at KU, and so I started writing this book while I was there, super early mornings and weekends after I had this idea for this book. And the idea for the book really happened, screwed that up again. Stand by again. The idea for the book this is a TV report that aired on Channel 9 in 2013. And I might play it for you in a second, though. Connor described the book, No Place Like Home, Lessons in Activism from LGBT Kansas. So, I'm gay, and I'm old, and I've been around since the days when we didn't even really talk about being gay, all the way up through gay marriage being legal. And I've seen a lot of changes over that time. And in 2004, 2005, the state of Missouri and then the state of Kansas passed constitutional amendments banning same-sex marriage. And at the pitch, we had covered this a lot. I knew the politics of it, and I had watched those changes over the last decade. And something weird happened in the summer of 2013. So the Supreme Court legalized marriage equality across the country in 2015. Okay, that's the final decision. But 2 years before that, in 2013, there were 2 cases that the Supreme Court decided that made same-sex marriage legal in some states. And this was a momentous occasion for us. And I went to this little rally downtown, and there were a couple hundred people there, and everybody was sort of trying to be enthusiastic about it. But I'm not going to play this because I'm just going to tell you. We were celebrating laws that didn't affect us. Okay? You couldn't get married in Missouri or Kansas. And so I thought, what a weird time in American culture. It's weird in the legal landscape. It's weird in the cultural landscape. I could drive up to Iowa and get married, but when I came back, as soon as I crossed the state line, I wouldn't be married anymore. This is weird. And when something feels that weird, I know I need to learn more. I need to investigate. I need to report, and I need to write. And so I began calling people and my initial question was, how are things going since the marriage amendment back in the mid-2000s? And people began telling me these stories, and I knew that there had been some surprising successes in Kansas. And I began to learn more about that, and the more I talked to people, the more I realized I really had a book. And so just to show you guys a little bit about this process, this is my paper file drawer of materials that I collected while reporting and researching. This is one folder of my hard drive, and each folder in there has a ton of other stuff. So this is basically what all the work that I did that goes into the book over the course of 4 years. And as Connor said, this ends up being a book about a group of people who feel like they're unfairly under attack. They decide they want to fight back. They roll up their sleeves. They go looking for fights, and they end up making friends in Kansas. What makes Kansas such fertile territory, in addition to it just being the center of America? Westboro, thank you. So this to me was a great place to tell this story of this weirdness in America. Double weird because of Westboro. Triple, not weird, but rich because one more reason why. It's Kansas. It's Kansas. Kansas has such a reputation for being Kansas. And what this book really is about the other Kansas that people don't really know. And so that was super hard work. It was super exciting to have it out. It's only been out a couple months, and I don't know if I'll ever try and write another book, but I did that. So really, that's my story, okay? And that's how I got here. And there's lots of ways that I could say, lessons that I learned from, how I stayed employed in an industry that had been decimated by the late 20th century Industrial Revolution. But these were like I always find it easy if you want to remember three things, you can remember three things, right? So these are the things that I would sort of leave you with today from my own experience. I made some crappy decisions, grad school being one of them, but I sort of ended up making some good out of that decision. I ended up finding a whole different career than I thought I was looking for. Learning grammar rules will get you far, you guys. I've seen over the years a lot of cover letters from people wanting jobs, and I read the cover letter way before I even look at the resume, and if the cover letter is badly written, I don't even keep reading. So learn your grammar rules, and when you see huge changes and challenges in life coming your way, I found that it's a lot easier to just face them instead of try and hide from them or just wait till the boulder rolls over you. So I'm going to stop talking now, but thank you so much for your attention, and I guess maybe if anyone has any questions, I'll try and answer them. But if no one has any questions, we don't have to do it.
Connor, you might. No, go ahead. I was gonna say,
We have a hand up here. Hey.
Out of all your projects, which one was the most nerve-wracking to work on with writing for it?
That's such a great question. Every single one makes me equally nerve-wracked because, first of all, I'm neurotic, but also, that feeling of, I've got all my reporting done, I've written it, I've turned it in, it's been edited, it's going out tomorrow, either whether it's going to be on the radio or it's going to be in the paper. Once all that's out of my hand, I just worry. I worry until then it's out, and then I see what it's going to do in its life, and then and then by then I'm on to my next thing, and so I'm worrying about something else. But in terms of, the only difference between the book and the other stuff is just the amount of volume and the amount of time. There's this whole period of months when you write a book in between when you turn it into the editors and the press works on it, and then it's months before it comes out, and I worry every day about that. I would say one more thing. Being in journalism is hard if you're a worrier, but being a worrier makes you a better journalist. No. Sorry, I'm calling on you before Connor's.
I have a question about, do you think that people are getting less interested in news, or that it's just changing form, like articles on web pages and stuff online, or do you think it's just people are less interested in news nowadays?
I think people are way more interested, and I think they're just getting it in so many more different formats, so many of which they expect to get for free. And so that's what's caused the sort of industry disruption. But I think this whole I think we're in a great moment of opportunity when we talk about fake news and news being circulated on social media and how to be media literate. And I'm really hoping that out of this particular period of time that we up those media literacy skills, and my hope is that people are getting smarter about this, what they're reading, where it's coming from, and credibility in general.
So I'm curious to know, what made you decide you wanted to get into journalism when you were younger? What was it that enticed you?
Thank you. I have no idea. I think the family lore is that my mom read books to me from a very early age. We were always going to the library for summer reading programs, and I think that, as a young child, it became clear to me that I could write. And I did other things. I kind of did arty things, like I drew, and I was an art student in the pottery room all the time. But I think being on the high school paper was where I got the most validation. And so I think that gave me momentum to keep going.
What's the most fulfilling project you've ever done? Sorry, no pressure.
The most recent one? I don't know, I mean, it's like asking what's my favorite child. I could answer that in big terms, like having a book out in the world is super fulfilling. But putting out 10 years of newspapers and working with all of those writers all the time, reading their stuff and helping everybody else, the people who worked at the Pitch and the New Times in those days, they went on to do really wonderful things. They did wonderful things while they were there, and they went on to do wonderful things also. So helping nourish young writers was also really fulfilling. Teaching is very fulfilling. So I think being able to stay employed, doing things that I love, in the midst of a decimating late 20th century industrial revolution has been the most fulfilling.
Would you say that journalism is a more vertically integrated or horizontally integrated industry in economic terms?
I've only taken one economics class in my whole life, and it was many, many years ago, back in the 70s. And so I'm not sure I understand exactly those terms well enough to answer the question.
Okay.
But I would guess
Is there a lot of
horizontally.
Okay. More private or publicly traded companies?
There's a lot. But I'm going to answer your question by answering a different question, which is to talk about KCUR, to talk about, remember very early in the talk I said something about, you guys are the journalists of the future and we hope you'll innovate and find new ways. And one of the newer ways, and an older way, is like nonprofit journalism. So we've begun to see nonprofit organizations funding journalistic enterprises, journalistic projects, and KCUR is a very old model of that. So we have new stuff cropping up, and we have public radio, which is the vast majority, and public TV, the vast majority of it funded by the users, so crowdfunded. And I'm not just saying that because it's pledge drive, but it is. You too can call 816-235-5287 or go online and pledge. So there's a lot of for-profit journalism, and that's partly what's caused that cliff that we talked about. But there are new models, other models. Is that even close to answering your question?
Yes. Yes.
You talk about the, economic downturn of journalism, print journalism, basically. I'm just asking a question. Do you think it might be more attributable to media bias and other things. I mean, the economy, it's one thing. People can get it other places, but my own personal thing, in 2006, I stopped buying the Kansas City Star. And I'm the kind of person that if I have to choose in the morning between getting a sandwich and a newspaper, I bought the newspaper. But in the midterm elections, I had so many words with Kurt Wagner and Steve Kraske and Barbara Shelley, I just said, I'm not buying your paper anymore because you're not telling the whole truth. And I've kept that promise. So I'm just wondering if other people, seeing the bias, or just, you know what, we'll go someplace else. I don't know if anybody's ever done a research study on that one. Generally the downturn, but why is there a downturn?
My guess is that for as long as there have been newspapers or pamphlets or writings on walls, that people who didn't like what they were reading had issues with what they would consider bias. So I think that's probably always, I think that's human nature. What changed around that time is, again, the internet. So when we suddenly have so many additional ways to get information, then we also saw the media segmenting. We saw it in radio formats, for example. There used to be like top 40. You guys will never remember this, but there used to be this time. Like if you put your device on shuffle and you hear all the different genres of music that you like, we used to be able to hear that on the radio. And now we have radio with different genres. Now we have cable news geared toward particular points of view. And so I think what happened is people began to be able to have access to news and information that they liked to consume a little bit more than the news and information that they really maybe didn't like to consume. And so a lot of people made those choices of what they wanted to invest in. And so certainly I've heard the critique that, a particular news outlet is biased, so I'm not going to support it. But that's not what creates this kind of cliff.
I work here in the Center for Sustainability, and in a couple weeks we have a free conference focusing on telling stories about complicated science things. Can you speak a little bit to the role that you think you play as a professional in helping us tell stories for the general public about complicated science stuff?
Thank you so much for this question. This goes directly to my experience at KU Medical Center, because KU Medical Center is, they're training doctors, but they're also training healthcare researchers, serious scientists who are doing the most complicated, hard to understand research that you can imagine. And scientists are really bad at talking about their work. They use a language that most people don't understand. And they're also, because they're so concerned about scientific, what's the word, credibility, legitimacy, a scientist, even a scientist who's actually made some kind of exciting breakthrough is nervous about calling it that because of this, so many factors in the world of science where you can't really say, I've done this amazing thing unless all of the other sort of scientists in your world confirm it. So when we had people at KU who had really exciting stories that we wanted to pitch to the media, first of all, we talked with the researchers and we sort of did this little secret screening, like, do you speak English comfortable? And I don't mean English, the language, I mean, can you talk to someone about your work in a way that everybody understands? And the folks who were good at that got a lot of media attention. The folks who struggled with that, only when it was absolutely necessary. So there are science journalists who are really good at translating that way, but I think I think one great solution, and I think you're seeing a little bit of it, is for scientists to learn how to speak the common language and how to talk about their work comfortably and in simple terms. I'm happy to come tell any scientist that too. So.
CJ, several of the students in here are in news reporting or advanced reporting classes, and they're going to be transferring to four-year schools in the next year or two and then starting a career. So do you have some advice you would offer students who are going to begin their professional careers in the next year or two?
Learn grammar rules. It's interesting because the idea of media segmentation. So I think I would give different advice to different people who are going into different formats, which is maybe a little more specific than would be helpful. But I would say learn your grammar rules. And I would also say just get a lot of clips. Get a lot of clips together. Get experience having your work published. On whatever platform you're working on. And don't lose hope that there's a career out there for you. And think about how people 10 or 20 years in the future might want to get their news and information, and see if you can make that happen. How's that for a charge?
3 points you have up on the screen.
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't read your book, but you made a mention about some of the people came to Kansas looking for a fight on LGBT issues and stuff. And I can only talk about my own experiences. My mother is 85 years old. When I was growing up, we knew that there were some people that were gay, and we didn't care. We just knew they're a little different. We didn't care. One of the guys I went to high school with, he's Charles Bruffy. I didn't care. The girl I sat next to, played clarinet with, she came out years later. I didn't care. You know, I'm a conservative, you know, and I really don't care one way about people's gender identity or sexuality, where they want to declare themselves. So when someone says, well, we came out looking for a fight, I'm kind of like, why are you looking for a fight with me?
There's the first part of that phrase, okay? People who are unfairly under attack went looking for a fight. So what's super interesting is, and if you do read my book, which I hope you might, there, over and over, you will hear these stories of Kansans who have those same kind of relationships with their neighbors and their bosses. And the others, you know, everybody values people for things other than, you know, whether they're gay or not. But you have to remember, there was this huge political wave. There was this huge effort in 2004, 2005 that really sort of came out of nowhere, where states, certain contingents in states all around the country decided we have to pass constitutional amendments making it illegal for same-sex couples to get married. Now, I've been around for a long time, and the cause of same-sex marriage was not my #1 cause. For a lot of us, it was not. And if you're on this side of history with all of that, what you saw is politicians realizing that this could be a really good wedge issue, okay? Let's get conservatives to the polls on this issue. And so, and you know, Democrats were just as enthusiastic about it because that was what the rhetoric was. We need to protect marriage. And so that's what I say when I say, like, we're unfairly under attack, because it wasn't us, it wasn't the national gay rights movement who said, getting married is our number one priority. There definitely were people who were wanting to get married. But if you ask like the national gay organizations, they didn't want to be discriminated against. They didn't want to get fired from their jobs. They didn't want to get kicked out of their houses. They didn't want to be killed just for being gay. Those were the big issues. But then this political thing about marriage happened, and so people had to respond. And so that's really what the book is about.
I was just thinking, I go back to my grandmother. I grew up a year when I lived with her when I was like 5 or 6. We talked about there was a couple women that were sisters, and that was it. You know, it was no real big deal. It was just they've been living together for years and years. And it's like just the whole thing. Nobody cares except socially. That seems to be the problem. Socially, we were told that we had to celebrate this. And it's one thing to say I don't really care. Another thing, celebrate it with us.
Nobody's saying in my book and in my own experience. What people are saying is some, you know, yes, we have our celebrations, but we're not forcing everybody else to go to them. We're saying we're going to have our celebration. I think one way to think about this is, well, it's a question of equality, okay? We want the same access to the same laws. We want the same rights that everybody has. And I think what was really hard for a lot of folks who weren't used to this idea, you know, people for so long, the idea of two guys walking down the sidewalk holding hands was so unimaginable that when guys started doing that, it felt shocking and intrusive to folks who felt uncomfortable about it. Okay? So if you think about what it's like, you know, if you're straight and you're out in public and you're showing a little bit of affection, most people who are straight who grew up that way probably never even think about it. And you know, so when gay people do that, suddenly it's like in everybody's face. And I understand that's hard. We're in a time where things are changing. And so I think if you're, I don't know, I see a hand up there, so maybe I'll shut up and let someone else talk.
Yes, on the LGBT. So I'm supportive of LGBT, and as a Christian woman, you know, it's your business. And it's my godson's business who's married to his lover. He's gay. But by the same token, I see that there is a bullying aspect with an extreme in the LGBT community. And not most LGBTs are extremist, like the right-wingers or the extreme left-wingers. So for instance, how do we deal with the problem in Oregon where the Klein family, as a Christian, exercised their right not to bake the cake? And yet Oregon has said you will be fined all this money, and they had the right to go somewhere else, but when the LGBT cake baker refused to bake the Christian cake, do you see what I'm saying? That was okay.
Yeah, you're talking about a situation that's making its way up to the Supreme Court.
Right, the Klein family in Oregon. And I just think it's very sad because my friends are gay, lesbians, you know, my godson, we all don't have those issues. And it even offends them. And of course, I'm just curious.
Interesting. I mean, like any group in society, you can't define a whole sort of subsection of humanity by saying it has one opinion on things. So there's lots of different opinions about this. The case that you're referring to involves a lawsuit where a couple of guys went to this baker that they had been going to for a really long time. Is this the one? and they said, we're getting married, will you make us a cake? And the woman said, I love you guys, I'll do anything, but my sincerely held religious beliefs don't allow me to make you a gay wedding cake. And the guys were like, and I don't remember all the details of this case, but at some point, and certainly the guys can go to any other baker in town. So at some point, the state gets involved and says, you have to bake these guys a cake, or else you can't bake cakes at all, okay? That's an oversimplified version of it, but that's basically how the arguments go. So here's, and so for a lot of people, they feel like the state is bullying the Christian people just for standing up for their beliefs, okay? And so that you'll hear this rhetoric a lot, you know, the gay rights people are bullies, okay, because they're forcing us to go against our religious beliefs. The other side of the argument is, this baker is open to the public. This baker serves the public. And if you're open to the public, if you have a license to do business to the public, you have to serve the public equally. And that means if I have to put a design on a cake that I don't really personally believe in, I still have to do it because I serve the public. So those are the two sides of this. Yes?
But that would violate their First Amendment right.
Well,
and yet the state regulations superseded the federal government Constitution First Amendment.
I think we'll see what the Supreme Court, how the Supreme Court rules on all of this, but
They had to shut their business. I mean, I respect both sides, but I think that it's just extremists on both sides that make it difficult for the LGBT community and those that support the First Amendment. So the majority of us, it's just really sad.
Well, I mean, I heard like it's not like there are a million cake bakers who make really intricate, fancy wedding cakes. So if that's like the local place that people go to, wouldn't that be
let's take this, and we're running out of time, which is probably a good thing. Very, very quickly, because I have a...
Well, I just wondered if you pointed out crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's a way for some of these newspapers not to do crowdsourcing through print, but I'm reading newspapers online, and some of them are offering ways to crowdsource.
Yes.
And I really appreciate that because I can't necessarily buy a subscription, but I would like to read their articles, and when I can read 10 articles and then it's all of a sudden, you know, I can't read any more, but some of them have been saying, okay, you know, you've read so many articles, would you like to make a $10 donation? And so is that a way to perpetuate some of these newspapers and keep good journalism?
Any media outlet that you read that is producing stories online that you enjoy reading, send them money even if they're not asking for it.
You know, I might say too, I'm sure CJ would be happy to hang around a couple of minutes afterwards. I know some people have to go to class.
Yeah.
So,
I think we're over time at this point. Yeah, so
Thank you
guys.
so much, CJ.